What's up, guys? This is Taking the Field with Stevie Mack, and on this episode, I'll give you my winners and losers from Week 3 in Baltimore for the PLL. I'll give you my updated power rankings through Week 3 of play, and we'll wrap it all up with my final thoughts and impressions from my trip to Baltimore this past weekend. So to jump in to this first segment of the show, we're going to get back into that segment I introduced back in Week 2 of the PLL season, the two-man game, where I give you my winners and losers from that past weekend in the league. So to get to my winners from this week, I've got Jeff Teat and the Chromes, and my losers are, I wanted to say Whipsnakes here, but I mean, come on, it's only one game. I don't think you can do that to them. That's not totally fair. So my losers, I'll go with the Redwoods and Lyle Thompson here. So again, the winners, Jeff Teat and the Chrome, the losers, Redwoods and Lyle Thompson. So to get to my winners here, Jeff Teat had 7 goals versus the Cannons, adding 2 assists in the game, and that was just his second game ever as a pro lacrosse player. And he didn't play in over a year, in case you didn't see everybody talking about that on Twitter over the weekend. But he's going to help make this offense, this Atlas offense, really fun to watch moving forward. And I said it last week, they'll have plenty of two-man game opportunities across the field with basically whoever they want to put into that matchup, whether it's Crawley and Law, whether it's Cockerton and Teat, whoever it is. They have so many different guys that they can use in a two-man game situation, or they have guys that can carry their man to X and isolate the matchups there. But the Chrome get my other winner on the weekend because they took down the champs and they looked good doing it. They didn't need overtime or a late score to pull it off. They just took care of business. And I think even without Zed and Matt Rambo, the Whipsnakes still had enough there to make it a game, and it just wasn't happening for them on Sunday afternoon. But I think the Chrome definitely applied some pressure to them to make some mistakes and really dominate that game the way that they did. And when they started to kind of see that they could pull it off, that things were really trending in their direction, that's when the Chrome really started to press the gas a little more and made the Whipsnakes have to play their game. So my losers, as I said, the Redwoods, I think offensively, while being rated top 3 in several categories as a team in face-off percentage, defense, power play, penalty kill, and goaltending, their offense, I think right now, is the biggest thing holding them back, especially with turnovers, because the guy specifically being tasked with being the quarterback of that offense is the one turning it over the most. Rob Pennell has 10 turnovers in their last 2 games, now 0-2 in that span, while guys like Kavanaugh had 3 against the Atlas a few weekends ago, and Miles Jones has had multiple turnovers in 3 of their 4 games. So the Woods have also now lost 2 straight, as I said, after many saw them as a possibly top 2, top 3 team after that second weekend down in Atlanta. So they're a team that's definitely on the downslide right now, and they need to find a way to turn that around here quickly, because it's not going to get much easier for them heading into week 4 of play. And then my other loser from the weekend is Lyle Thompson, the number 1 overall pick in the entry draft, had averaged a hat trick per game through his first 3 games in the league this year, and on Sunday he went 0 for 3 shooting with 5 turnovers. And the Cannons could have won that game had Lyle at least put 1 or 2 in the back of the net. He did, however, I will say this, he did end up with 2 assists in that game, but Michael Rexroad had a hell of a game on one of the best attackmen in the PLL on Sunday afternoon. So getting to some of your guys' comments on the winners and losers from week 3 in Baltimore, from Coach Shrek, he says his winners are Jeff Teat, Ryan Smith, and Jackson Morrill. Again, Teat going off on Sunday against the Cannons. I really like Jackson Morrill and what he's been able to do for this Chrome offense, being able to hold them up above water while guys like Gutterding and Heacock were a little bit slow to get going. Obviously, they came out hot on Sunday against the Whipsnakes, but I really have liked Morrill's ability to hold this offense up while still waiting for some of those guys to get going. And obviously, we've talked about the injury to Jordan Wolf and missing guys like Stotts, and now you're without Gaudet. They've definitely been hit with injuries and things like that on offense, but Morrill has definitely been a bright spot for them on that end of the field. His losers are the Whipsnakes attack, Redwood's offense, and Dylan Ward. Yeah, I would definitely agree with those as well. I think the Whipsnakes offense showed that they do definitely revolve around Zed Williams and Matt Rambo, which I think to an extent we already kind of knew, but I think on Sunday you saw a totally different team, especially offensively, without those two on the field. But I'll get to more of that a little bit later on in the show. The Redwoods offense, again, I've talked about it already on this episode. I've talked about it in past episodes. Their ability to hang on to the ball moving forward, and especially a guy like Rob Pennell, who's being tasked as being the quarterback of that offense at X, that's going to be very crucial for them moving forward. And Dylan Ward, again, I have to agree with this one, because for all the hype that was around Dylan Ward in the first 2 years of the PLL as a backup to Blaze Reardon, and then finally getting his opportunity to start here with the Water Dogs this year, I really expected a lot more from him than a 43% save percentage, I think, is where he's at through the first 3 weeks of the season. So Dylan Ward, to me, was a guy that, for all the hype that fans had around him those first 2 years, and people shouting for him to be traded so that he could have a chance to play and things like that, I really expected more out of Dylan Ward now that he had that opportunity to be a starter in the PLL. From Michael Grine, he said, winners Atlas took the Whips to overtime and then won a thriller against the Cannons. Jeff Teat and the young attack look so dangerous. Number 2, he has the Chrome. The Beauties lived up to their name this week. Sure, the Whips had some injuries, but Chrome looked great on both sides of the ball. And number 3, he has Chaos. I thought about going Archers here, he says, but the Chaos gutting out a tough win against the Woods while their backs were against the wall was maybe a momentum shifter for them. And yeah, I would have to agree with all three of these. The Atlas, especially in that loss, I said it on Friday night, leaving the stadium after that game. I said, look, I'm not even all that sad about this loss because they played so much better than I had expected from them going into that game, that the fact that they even took that game to overtime, in my mind, was almost a win in itself. Obviously, I'm not one for moral victories here, but to me, the way that they played showed that, yes, this is going the right direction. Ben Rubior does know what he's doing. They have the pieces in place now with guys like Jeff Teat really filling out that offense. So yes, I do think that despite the loss, they looked really good in that game. And then they came out against the Cannons and they found a way to win. The Chrome, again, you can say what you want about missing Zed and Rambo, but the Chrome just went out and took care of business against the Whipsnakes. And the Chaos, yes, by a lot of accounts, that was a must-win game for the Chaos, and they found a way to do it. It didn't necessarily look pretty on either side, whether it's the Chaos or the Redwoods. Neither one necessarily looked all that great in that game, but they found a way to make a few more plays when the plays needed to be made, and they won that game. It's plain and simple. His losers, he says, the Whips, not just for losing the game, that was bound to happen sometime, but seeing the team without Rambo and Zed was tough. The Whips had two guys that could be the guy on offense, and now they lose both. Number 2, he has the Water Dogs. He says played the Archers, but still, yuck. And 3, he has the Cannons in close games. The Cannons have proven that they're a force to be reckoned with and have top-level talent everywhere, but they keep losing these one-goal games, and that has to be weighing on morale and confidence. They need to win a close one soon. And again, I totally agree with all these. The Whipsnakes, yes, they were bound to lose a game sometime. They're not... they are human. They're going to lose a game once in a while. I didn't expect them to go undefeated 2 consecutive years. But again, it comes back to without Rambo and Zed, this offense looked completely lost and lacking real production and real playmakers. I mean, Aslanian had, I believe it was 3 goals for them, but they got all 6 of their goals out of 3 guys. So you can't just rely solely on 2 guys to do everything for you offensively and to be your offense. When they're out, when one or both of them is out, you need to have other guys that you can turn to in that offense. And again, I'll get to that more, I believe, in segment 2. But the Water Dogs, yes, they played the Archers. I'll agree with that. The Archers are scorching hot to start the season, but the Water Dogs didn't look very good in that game. They didn't put up much of a fight in that one. And again, I'll touch more on that in segment 2, so stay tuned for that. And then the Cannons, yes, I again will agree that they are playing these games close. They do have 3 one-goal losses, but with the team that they have and the veteran presence that they have on this roster, they need to start turning those 1-goal losses into maybe 1 or 2-goal wins. You got to start finding a way to make a few more plays to flip that score in your favor. And then finally from Michael Ramirez, he says, Teat won the weekend, but being an Atlas fan, I have to give love to Rexroad, who put the clamps on Lyle. Rexroad seems to be drawing the tough assignments, and he thinks that he had RP3 for the game against the Woods. So yeah, again, Teat definitely was one of the stars of the weekend, I think, overall, with his 9-point performance against the Cannons in just his second pro game ever, showing people why he went number 1 overall in the college draft. And it was really fun getting to watch him and this Atlas offense go to work this weekend. Again, I would even say so in the loss to the Whipsnakes, because the Whipsnakes are one of the better defensive teams in the league, and their offense did have the ability to put up points against them and put up points against Burnlort and was able to force overtime. So yes, Teat did make a big difference for them offensively, but this offense is really starting to trend in the right direction. And yes, Rexroad, in a game on Sunday where the defense and Jack Kincannon didn't play particularly well, I don't think, giving up 17 goals even in a win, Rexroad was sort of that bright spot for me when I heard that he had held Lyle Thompson scoreless, and that was only the second time in Lyle's pro career that he had been held without a goal in a game. So anytime you can do that against one of the better attackmen in the game, you're going to be one of the stars of the weekend for sure. But coming up in segment 2, I want to get to my power rankings through week 3. We had a couple spots shake up from week 3, so we'll get to that in just a moment. You're listening to Taking the Field with Stevie Max. All right, welcome back to Taking the Field with Stevie Max. Segment 2 of the show, we're going to get to the power rankings for the PLL through week 3 of play, heading towards week 4 in New York. If you missed segment 1, I talked about my winners and losers from week 3 down in Baltimore. I was there to watch those games over the weekend, had a blast doing so. I'll talk more about my experience and just my overall thoughts from the weekend later on in segment 3 of this episode. But to get to these power rankings here from through week 3 now in Baltimore. Number 1, leading it off, I got the Archers. They're the only undefeated team remaining in the league, and they have a goal differential of a ridiculous 25. I believe that's more than what we saw the Whipsnakes finish with a year ago in the championship series. So just putting up ridiculous numbers on offense, the way that they're able to outscore their opponents. And the defense and Adam Gittleman has been stellar so far this year, giving up 7.3 goals against per game. And you even look at their game on Saturday against the Water Dogs. Gittleman had 3 points on Saturday. He had a 2-bomb right there at the end, and he had an assist earlier on in the game when I really thought he was going to pull up and try to take that shot, and then at the last minute, he passed out and got the assist. But he made up for it, like I said, with that 2-bomb at the very end. And then number 2, I got the Whipsnakes. Yes, they lost. It was bound to happen. We all know this. We didn't expect them to go undefeated, like I said in segment 1. And they're still one of the top teams in the league. Make no mistake about it. They're very good offensively. as long as they have Zed and Matt Rambo, apparently. But they're still very good offensively, still one of the better teams defensively, I think. They did struggle on Sunday, and I think Burnlore had trouble with some of the high heat that the Chrome were giving him. But they really need, I think, to show me now if these injuries to Zed and Rambo are anything significant. They need to show me that there is life outside of the two of them. Like I said in segment one, Aslanian had 3 goals, Kirst had 2, and Brad Smith had 1. But when you look at some of their other shooters in that offense, guys like Hawes, Chanenchuk, and Carlson combined 0 for 11 shooting in that loss. And even Rambo, prior to exiting that game with his injury, went 0 for 4 shooting in that game as well. But still, I got to put them at number 2 here just because we know who they are. Saturday was not who they were, or excuse me, Sunday is not who they were. I expect them to get back to form here in week 3, so they get the number 2 spot. Number 3, all the way up from, I believe I had them 5 or 6 a week ago. Number 3, I have the Atlas because while the Atlas haven't played perfectly, they're still trending in the right direction based upon the eye test. Getting to see them twice this weekend in Baltimore, I think definitely made me feel a lot better of the direction that this team is going. They scored 14.5 points per game in Baltimore. I should say goals per game in Baltimore. And Teat had 7 goals, 2 assists, and just 1 turnover against the Cannons. Again, in just his second ever pro game, which I think was huge for them offensively. He and Caraway are now leading in points for attackmen on this Atlas squad. And again, Teat's only played 2 games. The rest of them have played 3 or 4 games by now. So Teat's one of their leading scorers at attack in just 2 games. And the defense played really well, I think, against the Whipsnakes, who had Zed and Rambo in that game. And it really helped give them a shot when they went to overtime. But even though the defense struggled against the Cannons, I think that Rexroad holding Lyle scoreless in that game for just the second time in his pro career really helped me feel better about the way that they played in that game. Because at the end of the day, holding him scoreless is a big part of how the Atlas were able to pull that game out. Number 4, I have the Redwoods. The Redwoods are on a 2-game skid, as we all know, after looking like one of the better 3 teams in the league through the first 2 weeks. But the turnovers have definitely hurt them, I think, offensively. And in their last 2 games, as I mentioned, Rob Pennell has 10 turnovers and 7 points on 4 of 15 shooting their last 2 games. The Water Dogs come in at number 5. The Water Dogs started the year with Dylan Ward, I think, trying to figure out how to be a starter in the PLL after backing up Blaze Reardon the previous 2 seasons. And even still now, after week 3, he's currently saving 43% of his shots faced, which is last in the PLL for starters. And the offense wasn't there, I think, in week 1, but Schlosser and Ryan Brown really took control in week 2 and helped them bounce back. And they ran into a red-hot Archers team in week 3, but didn't look all that good in the process. I mean, Adam Gittleman had more points on Saturday night than everyone who registered a point for the Dogs in that game. Gittleman had 3, and the top scorers, the top point scorers for the Water Dogs in that game all had 2. Number 6, I have the Chrome. The Chrome have had their injuries. We all know this. But on Sunday was the first time this season where it didn't really seem to matter, and we didn't use that as an excuse. And why? Because they won convincingly against the Whipsnakes. And while the Whips were without Zed and mostly without Rambo for that game, the Whipsnakes still should have been able to make that more of a competitive game than what it was. And you have to give a lot of the credit, I think, to the Chrome for the way that they played that game all around. Guys like Heacock and Gutterding combined for 7 goals on 8 shots, including a 2-bomb, while Jackson Morrill tallied a team-high 4 goals. And Galloway had one of his better games, I think, in the PLL, having 21 saves, good for 78%, still against an offense that had guys like Hawes, Chanenchuk, Carlson, guys like that. Brad Smith, another one. So still, even without Zed and Rambo, they still had enough there offensively to where they could put points on the board, and Galloway just slammed the door on them. And this wasn't about the Whipsnakes, I think, missing Zed and Rambo. It was more about the Chrome finally piecing it together, finally getting guys like Gutterding and Heacock going a little bit. The defense you saw played with a lot of confidence, a lot of physicality against the Whipsnakes, and they just overpowered them, I think, for the most part. Number 7, I've got the Cannons. And I think that we may have been wrong before. I think you do actually have to start considering the record a bit when looking at a team like this, because it's hard to put a team like the Cannons near the top of the power rankings when they're 1-3, even with their 3 losses being by 1 goal apiece, because this is a veteran team that should know how to pull these kinds of games out. You don't get points just for being close, like, oh, you only lost by 1, so it could be worse type of thing. It's like, no, they have the kind of players on this roster, they have the kind of veteran leadership to where they need to start winning some of these close games, making a few more plays to start flipping that score in their favor, like I talked about in segment 1. But I think offensively, they are a really good team in that they showed that against the Atlas when their best player was held scoreless. A side note to that as well is that Lyle has 13 points and 13 turnovers on the year. So as good as he's been scoring and being productive as one of the leading players in this in this Cannons offense, he also does have quite a few turnovers to go along with it. So it'd be interesting for me, as somebody who didn't participate in PLL fantasy this year, it'd be interesting for me to see what kind of fantasy production guys like Lyle have, or a guy like Pinnell have, when they have almost as many turnovers as they do points, because that weighs heavily when you look at a league like Flow Fantasy and the way that they do their point systems. So I'd love to know, if you guys have them on your team, what kind of fantasy production they've provided you so far this summer. But the defense, I think, has shown for the Cannons that they can play at a high level, but Sunday wasn't one of those days for them. They're struggling also on faceoffs, with Simino and Kelly combining for just 36% on the year. That's something that I've talked at length about with the Chaos and their struggles at the stripe, but the Cannons as well are a team that has struggled there as well. So they need to start getting that total up a lot higher. The Chaos then come in at number 8. The Chaos got the win against the Redwoods, but it still doesn't take away, I think, from their inefficiencies, where while a guy like Blaze is leading the league in save percentage, the Chaos are tied for 4th in the league for scores against average. They're last in faceoff percentage and second to last in total scores, and they're last in penalty kills. So again, their one bright spot that I mentioned last week, their one bright spot for me has been Blaze Reardon this year, and those numbers kind of bear that out. So the win against the Redwoods to me was a good step in the right direction, but they need to build on that with a game coming in week 4 against the Cannons, who I think will also be desperate for a win in week 4 to keep their season alive, really. Both these teams going into that game 1-3 on the year, both really desperate for a win. So we'll see how that shakes out in week 4. But I've got one more segment that I want to get to real quick. My final thoughts from Baltimore on the other side of this break. You're listening to Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. Welcome back to Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. Final segment of the show here as we wrap things up, put a bow on this past weekend from Baltimore. I had the pleasure of being there this past weekend to watch all 3 days of games. Had a blast doing so. So I'll give you my final thoughts from the weekend and my experience as a whole there. Give you a couple of notes on each team from what I've seen from them so far this year. And we're going to go not in ranking order, but we're going to go alphabetical here. So Archers, starting it out, they continue to dominate, I think, at both ends of the field. It's plain and simple. They've shown that they're easily the best team right now in this league, and they might be the new team to beat this year now that the Whipsnakes have actually lost a game. The Archers might be the team to beat and are likely now the favorites to win it all in 2021. The Atlas, the improvement is definitely there. I've talked about it in segment 2 of this episode. The improvement is definitely there, and that was the biggest thing for me after that beatdown at the hands of the Archers. That was my biggest thing for them these next couple weeks was, how are you going to improve? There's definitely a need for improvement after that week 1 loss. So how are you going to make those adjustments? How are you going to put these guys in a position to be successful? And we've seen how they've done that with the addition of guys like Jeff Teat now being able to play, and seeing the defense play a little bit better together as a unit. And even on Sunday, relying on a guy like Rexroad locking down Lyle Thompson the way that he did. But the improvement is definitely there. They're taking the steps in the right direction to be able to take those next steps to becoming one of those top 4, top 5 teams in the league. And a lot of people, from what I saw this weekend, had the Atlas in their power rankings around that 3 to 4 area, because they don't really believe in the direction that the Redwoods and the Water Dogs are currently trending. So that's why they bumped up the Atlas as high as they did. And quite honestly, that's why I bumped them up as high as I did. The Cannons, they need to keep battling. The wins will come. They've had their shots with these 1-goal games that they've been playing, but I think for Lyle, he just needs to erase the scoreless game that he had this weekend and move on. This team will definitely get their wins, but they need to find a way to be able to turn those close games in their favor by making just a few more plays, whether it's making a few more saves, whether it's getting a couple more ground balls, whether it's, making a few more passes, whatever it is that they need to do, they need to start figuring out ways to make the plays when they need to be made in order to get those 1-goal losses to turn into maybe 1 or 2-goal wins. The Chaos got their first win of the season, but now they need to build on it. They know where they need to be better. Now they just have to go out and fix that. There's still time for them to make a push, I think, this year by getting that win when their back was against the wall here in week 3. But again, they need to go ahead now and build on that momentum and turn 1 win into 2 wins and turn 2 wins into 3 and really start to get back into this thing as we head into the stretch run. The Chrome, somebody had to take down the champs. It was bound to happen, and the Chrome were just the guys to do it. But I think week 3 is over now, and they have to be ready for week 4. They can't just sit here and be like, oh, well, we beat the Whip Snakes, so our job's done. They need to be ready for week 4 because they get the Archers on Friday and the Atlas on Sunday. So this is going to be a big, big weekend for the Chrome coming up. And I think if they come out of this weekend 1-1, they'll be trending in the right direction after getting that win over this past weekend. The Redwoods just need to find some consistency on offense and more specifically stop turning the ball over and find a way to put an end to this losing skid before it sinks them below 500 as they now sit at 2-2 on the year. The Water Dogs just need to bounce back from an embarrassing performance against the Archers in which Adam Gittleman actually outscored every offensive individual for the Water Dogs. And they don't get much of a break, though, in week 4 as they have to play the Redwoods, who I just talked about, in week 4 out in New York. The Whip Snakes are still a very, very, I can't say it enough, but very good team. And I think the hope for them is that the injuries to guys like Zed and Rambo aren't lengthy ones like we've seen with Wolf and with Michael Sowers. So hopefully they get those two back on the field soon, because the offense definitely needs them. You saw the absence of those guys on Sunday against the Chrome, so they need to get those guys back on the field ASAP. Defensively, they just need to forget about Sunday and move forward. Maybe watch some film and get ready to bounce back in week 4, although they'll have a tough task ahead of them in week 4 as they play the Archers on 4th of July, which I think is a game that every single person in the lacrosse community is going to be making sure that they tune in for. But my final thoughts as we wrap up this episode, my final thoughts from this weekend are that I was really pleased with the weekend in Baltimore. I loved being able to experience the league in person for the first time and watch these teams go at it for 3 straight days. The weather was beautiful there. Couldn't complain. Yes, I did get a little sunburn, but again, no complaints there as I was able to spend 3 straight days at Homewood watching some of the best lacrosse players in the world go at it. And also, as far as the weather goes, I mean, it was 80 degrees and sunny every single day there, which is more than I can say about the weather that we apparently had here in Michigan over the weekend. So, again, no complaints there. It was also really fun getting to explain the game because I had my girlfriend there with me over the weekend watching the games. So I got to explain the game to her a little bit more. And she really started, I think, getting the hang of it on Friday night when we were there watching the Atlas game against the Whipsnakes, because she asked a ton of questions, and she was asking a lot of the right questions too. You know, they were good questions. And so I think she really started getting the hang of it a little bit. So that was really cool. Also, I shout out to Jordan Johnson. I got to meet him over the weekend. Obviously, we've had him on the show a bunch over the past year or so. So great getting to catch up with him this weekend as well. And the last thing I'll say is this: if you're on the fence about attending a PLL weekend, or you're somebody that's relatively new to the sport of lacrosse or the league more specifically, go ahead and do it. You know, you'll spend a bit of money in the process, but I think it's worth it, really. So you go for the weekend and you really get to experience the teams in this league and the way that they're doing things, and the in-game production that they put on. And while you're there, make sure to do other stuff too, wherever it is that you end up going. Obviously, I went to Baltimore, as we know, but don't just make it all about lacrosse. Go and do other things too, you know, explore a little bit and have a little bit of fun. I went to the National Aquarium while I was down there in Baltimore and got to walk around downtown a lot, and to me it was just an absolute blast. So if you are thinking about going, just go, because I thought about going to a couple weekends back in 2019. I didn't end up pulling the trigger and going, and then 2020 we obviously had the championship series, so none of us could go. So I was really looking forward to going to a weekend here in 2021, and I was glad that I chose Baltimore to do it because I had an absolute blast. But that'll do it for this episode of Taking the Field with Stevie Mac. Make sure to like, comment, and share on this post. You can also check out the podcast anywhere you get your podcasts for any and all past, present, and future episodes. But that'll do it for me. I'll talk to you guys later.